Well, welcome to Post-Gazette Live, the big show. That's what we call it every day, the big show at 5 o'clock, where we talk about sports. We talk about the Steelers, the Penguins, the Pirates, whatever else we need to talk about. We always try and get it in and make it as informative and entertaining as possible. I hope you all are doing well on this Wednesday. Already, believe it or not, it's Wednesday. We are we are, I guess, now that it's 5 o'clock. We are officially past the the halfway point of the weekend. One of the things I wanted to start with today is we talk about the Steelers a lot, and we talk about them being stuck in their ways, and we talk about how they're not going to do what it takes to basically go out and try and improve. In ways they need to improve. They made it very clear they're not going to change their offensive coordinator, their head coach, or anybody else really in that regard. If you really want to get down to it, they basically have said we're good with what we're doing, and we're not going to change. And they've got the right philosophy and everything else from the standpoint of I feel like that's the way they do things, and everybody should just sort of accept it. Well, my thing is, if you're going to be stuck in your ways, and they're stuck in their ways, let's face it, they're completely stuck in their ways. They're completely stuck in a way that probably 20 years ago, 25 years ago, 30 years ago worked. If you're going to be completely stuck in your ways, you should at least explore some sort of creativity, period. And I think that's what the Steelers have lacked, creativity. Great example. I just saw this story today, and this is where I'll start. The Miami Dolphins, who have, Mike McDaniel, who's considered like one of these offensive gurus. They've got an offense that is supposedly high tech and all that other good stuff. They hired today a senior pass game coordinator. In other words, they needed to find a title for a guy who could come in and be a consultant, essentially, that could help them with their pass game, that could help them with their route trees, with all of the different things that it takes to have a good passing game. Bobby Slowik, if you remember, was the Houston Texans offensive coordinator. Last year, he was one of the hottest names on the market. This year, it's amazing. Stephon Diggs gets hurt. Tank Dell gets hurt. The running back, the guy from the Bengals, I can't think of his name. It's late in the day when I do these. But anyway, he got hurt for a period. And all of a sudden, Bobby Slowik is now considered, guess what? He was a problem. They fire him. And it's like, well, why would you fire the guy? I mean, a bunch of guys got hurt. It looked to me like C.J. Stroud still got, he was pretty good and got better as the season went on. But this is a guy that is going to be a head coach at some point. And this is a guy that basically has one of these, offenses. Joe Mixon is his name. That's who I'm trying to think of. But he's a guy that, was really considered highly by so many people for so long, because he is a guy who has that sort of new age thinking when it comes to offense. He's a guy that is from the tree of Kyle Shanahan. He's a guy that's got, from that cut from that cloth. So why would you not want somebody like that? If you're going to be so stubborn, okay? If you're going to be so stubborn that you got to continue to run your own guys out there just to prove it, that what we're doing works and everything else, Okay, if you're going to do that, why would you not at least get another set of eyes on the whole thing to make sure, that you have an idea that maybe there are some different ways that you can do things. See, that's where I talk about the creativity of the Steelers and the fact they're lacking creativity. That's where I talk about it all the time. I always say, when you think about it from this standpoint, I always say it like this. The Steelers need to find a way to become more creative and join the 20th century. And the only way you do that is if you're forward thinking in what you're doing. If you're willing to take your mind and say, let's open it up and let's learn some new things. So, okay, you don't want to turn your offense over to one of these guys that's a offensive guru or whatever, however the hell you want to call it, right? It's just one of those things where it is just in a situation of where if you're gonna be stubborn, how about bringing in a guy as a consultant? Somebody who can sit there and look at what you're doing, maybe improve some of the things you're doing in your passing game, because obviously Arthur Smith, that's not his strong point. His strong suit has always been the running game. So maybe you bring in a guy like Bobby Slowik. I thought it was bad. I just did. It's just one of those things where I think when you look at a guy who is basically very good at watching film, obviously, and putting together an offense and all that other stuff, I'm just going to tell you, I think it's amazing that you wouldn't want this guy to join your staff or somebody like this guy. That's what I think is really frustrating, because I really believe that if you have a guy like him, he's out there. Go out there and find a couple of guys like this. Find a few consultants like this. Find people that are really going to help you, get better in the areas that you need to get better at. That's what I would say is the biggest issue I have with what they're doing. To me, okay, you want to be loyal to your guys. You want to bring back your offensive coordinator and your defensive coordinator and all that other good stuff. Okay, good. If that's what you want to do because you want to be stubborn, to me, it's very simple. How about be stubborn, but also be smart, right? I mean, you've got enough defensive guys, I think, looking at what's going on. But here's the thing. How about hire another defensive coordinator and call him a defensive consultant or a senior consultant for defense? And then you go out and you find somebody like Bobby Slowik, who, was on the market. You could have went and hired him. And you go find that guy. And you basically say, okay, this guy is somebody who I think if we really look at it, he's a guy that can help us because his philosophy is completely different than ours. He will see things differently than we see them. He will be able to help us in ways that he needs to help us. And that's really got to be what it is. And I think that if the Steelers want to really get to the next level, this is something they have to consider trying to do. And that is they really, really need to just start to think outside the box and find solutions to these kinds of issues if they are so hell-bent on making sure that, hey, you know what we want to do here is very simple. What we want to do here is, maintain stability. We have our basic, we have our basic foundation that we want to keep. We have our basic principles that we want to keep. We have our coaches that we would like to, continue to let them build what they're, on what they're doing. But for us to get to the next level, we need to go out and find, it's very simple. We need to go out and find a couple of other guys to help us out. Period. So I feel like that's really what we're talking about here. That's really what we're looking at here. It kind of is just sort of a thing of where the Steelers, I think, missed on an opportunity. And there's some other guys out there that they could go out and go get. I mean, everybody's talking about quarterbacks. Everybody's talking about, receivers. They're talking about all this other good stuff. And I get it. I understand why. But the reality is they have to start to talk about also a slight change in the philosophy. They have to start to talk about that as well. They also have to stop acting so stubborn that they won't listen. And I think that's where we're at right now. They're stubborn. And their stubbornness prevents them from going out and doing things like the Dolphins just did, where you hire a guy to be your senior offensive consultant. You hire a guy in order to be your senior offensive consultant. He's a guy that will come in, watch film with you, try and improve on what you're doing in terms of your pass game, try and improve on some of the things you're doing with personnel packages. It's another set of eyes that's very experienced, that's really good on that side of the ball. So it's just amazing to me when I see how some of these other teams operate. And I wonder if the Steelers really understand modern day football. Someone just asked me, let's see. Do we know that the Steelers did not talk with Bobby? No, we don't know that. But here's the thing. I'd be willing to bet they didn't, because that's not their style. It's not how they do things. I mean, the whole situation was with Brian Flores last year, or whatever it was. I guess it was 2 years ago, whatever it was. That whole situation came about because Mike Tomlin wanted to help a young guy, save his career. That's what happened there. And that wasn't where the Steelers were out trying to improve themselves. They were trying to help young people. A young coach. Mike Tomlin wanted to help a young coach because Mike Tomlin has the kind of cachet and respect and everything else in the league that if he hired him, basically he dusted off his beat up resume because of all of the things he was doing with the lawsuits and all that stuff. Brian Flores was a guy who was basically very close to Brian. He was very, very close to being blackballed and maybe never getting another opportunity. And Mike Tomlin didn't want to see that for him. So he called Mike Tomlin looking for advice on what to do and how to do it and what, next step type of stuff and all of that good stuff. And by the end of the conversation, Mike Tomlin said, tell you what, let me get back to you, but would you be interested in taking a job with me for a year? And if you do, next year we'll send you back out. You'll go be a defensive coordinator, maybe even a head coach. So I look at it from the standpoint of that's probably that's probably going to be an exception, not the rule. The rule, in my mind, would be that there is, a status quo, that bunch of coaches that sort of stay in the same place. They do kind of the same things year after year after year after year after year. And because of that, they're at a certain level and never get to the next level. And so I feel like that's where the Steelers are. And so when you ask me, do I think that Bobby Slowik, that the Steelers talk to him? I would probably guess not, because it's not their style. They're not going to talk to a guy like that because, Arthur Smith is their guy. Forget for a fact that one could probably help the other. It's just going to be, always the same with the Steelers. And this is what I tell you when I talk about creativity. That's the kind of creativity that I think the Steelers need to sort of develop. Okay, you don't want to fire coaches. Got it. Okay, you don't necessarily want to, move on from coach to coach to coach. Got it. But I don't know. That's the way I look at it. And it is going to be one of those things where I just feel like if they don't develop this thing to a point where they're going to make these kind of moves, I just want to know, what do they think is going to change? That's what I would tell you. What is going to change? So I just don't think anything's going to change, to be honest. I just don't. Anyway, speaking of quarterbacks, did you see there's another quarterback that might be on the market? Why not we talk about for the Steelers? That would be Derek Carr. Any interest in Derek Carr? I just saw a thing come across that said Derek Carr is going to be a guy who's probably going to be let go or is going to be released. Would that interest you? Probably not. But nevertheless, he's another guy that we want to talk about, right? Because it's a quarterback, and the Steelers are going to be the team that is always going to be connected to the quarterback's jobs. And when I read this one, Derek Carr, I said, Derek Carr, Matthew Stafford, and it's just now one of those things where I say Matthew Stafford, Derek Carr, Aaron Rodgers. Sorry, don't have any interest in any of those guys. I just don't know. I just don't know what people are saying or what they want. To me, it doesn't make a lot of sense when we hear about these retread guys because the Steelers' problem is very simple. The Steelers' problem is they need to find their quarterback of the future. Now then, Kellen Moore was hired for the Saints. He is now the he's now the head coach for the Saints. I'm looking at all the hirings, and let's go here and try and figure out what pattern we've sensed. Kellen Moore, offensive coordinator, right? It's just one of those things where he's an offensive coordinator. Brian Schottenheimer, who went to the Dallas Cowboys, offensive guy, right? Liam Cohen, Jacksonville, offensive guy. Pete Carroll, Aaron Glenn are defensive guys. Ben Johnson, who went to the Bears, is an offensive guy. Vrabel, what is Vrabel's? I think he came up as a special teams guy, didn't he? Let's see I think he was a defensive guy too. I think he might have been a defensive guy before he was a head coach. But let's see where he was at, what his pedigree is. And it is, let's see, linebackers, all defense. Okay. So really, it's one of those things where I keep hearing people say the Steelers need to hire an offensive guy because that's the wave of the future. But again, I'll be honest with you, if you look at it, there were 8 coaches hired this year, 4 offensive coordinators, right? And then you've got a defensive coordinator. You've got 1, 2. Wait a second here. There are 8 coaches hired. Yes, you got four offensive coordinators, 3 defensive coordinators, and 2 defensive coordinators and 2 head coaches who were defensive coordinators. So I don't know that it really holds water to say that everybody's hiring offensive guys. I just don't. Because I look at some of these teams, and I think the Patriots, for instance, they decided Mike Vrabel was an adult, a really good coach who's a guy that may, if we put the right cast around him, all of a sudden, it's just a thing. It's just a thing of where you say, okay, we're going to hire a defensive coach because a defensive-minded coach, if he hires the right offensive guy, it is really going to be the right formula to win. And so when I look at Kellen Moore, yeah, you'd like a guy like him or Ben Johnson. I guess Liam Cohen, I guess, had similar, people, felt similar about them. But reality is, it's not about your head coach as much as it is about your head coach and his staff. When Bill Cowher was hired, he was a young guy. He kept two experienced, was it Ron Earhart and, who was his defensive coordinator? It was Don Capers, I think, was his defensive coordinator. He had two guys that were really experienced until he was old enough and experienced enough as a head coach that he felt like he could hire. But even then, he hired Dick LeBeau. Mike Tomlin came in. He had Bruce Arians and Dick LeBeau as his coordinators. After those two guys sort of ran their course, he felt a little bit more empowered, which is how you end up with a guy like Matt Canada. But to me, it's not about the head coach completely. It's about the head coach and the two coordinators combined. That's what really is the most important number or the most important thing to me. Not just who is the head coach. Who's the head coach and who's the coordinators? And I think that, we've seen this hiring cycle when everybody predicted that all the coaches were going to be offensive-minded, right? That's just it. All these coaches aren't offensive-minded. And so I feel like that's where we're at with respect to the entire discussion. But to me, I think there's a lot of different ways the Steelers could have gotten creative and made some things happen that they just didn't make happen. Switching gears, and by the way, the game's always on at Archie's. Get down to Archie's on Carson Street. Archie's, home of 80-cent wings, Monday through Thursday, home of the Paul Zeise grilled cheese sandwich. I'll say this. Is there a more pirate story that's ever happened than this Spencer Horwitz thing? I mean, is there a more Pirates thing that's ever happened than this? 27-year-old first baseman. They acquired him in a trade, right, with the Guardians. They got rid of, Luis Ortiz, Micah Kennedy, and Josh Hartle. They traded for him, and we just learned this today when Ben Cherington spoke with the media. We just learned this today that they knew he had wrist injuries. They knew that he had a couple of things going on with his wrist injury. And they say he had a surgery to cure chronic symptoms, but that also this was a new wrist injury. Doesn't sort of add up to me. Why do the Pirates always seem to be in this predicament? Where they sign a guy or trade for a guy, their big acquisition of the offseason, a guy that is supposed to solidify one of their most important positions or one of their biggest holes, and they get to the day of spring training begins, pitchers and catchers reporting, and they have a guy now who has a wrist injury, is going to be out 6 to 8 weeks, which means 6 to 8 weeks he's out. Then he's got rehab. Then he's got to, ramp up and get enough at-bats to get his wrist back in order and all that, a rehab assignment. I mean, if he plays before May 1st, it's going to be, I think, a miracle. If he plays before May 1st at this point. If his timeline for recovery is 6 to 8 weeks, when you add on the time of rehab after that and the rehab assignment that will come and all that other stuff, all that good stuff, guess what? We're talking 6 to 8 weeks. Period. And so your big acquisition of the offseason is already out for a significant amount of time. That's the Pirates in a nutshell. That's what they do. That is really what they do. And I feel like, you know what? This is just sort of Groundhog Day. Every single year, the same exact thing happens. The same exact thing happens. And I feel like when we talk about it every year, some people act like they're surprised by this. But you shouldn't be. This is a franchise that just doesn't seem to know how to get out of its own way. So you've got this thing, and now the Pirates have a problem at first base. They're going to have to try now and figure out who to put on first base. Good luck with that. They're going to have to try and figure out who is going to fit into first base. And I've talked about Brian Reynolds. They've talked about Hank Davis. They've talked about, there's a number of guys they've talked about, but the whole point of bringing Horwitz here was so you didn't have to do this. And you have an entire spring training now where you're going to have guys getting ready at first base when reality is that none of them are going to play first base. I just don't understand how the Pirates operate and why they operate the way they do. It makes no sense to me. If you knew the guy had chronic wrist injuries and you knew the guy had wrist problems and you knew that this could happen, why would you trade for him? The easy answer is something about money, but I don't necessarily know that I agree with that either. I mean, they seem to not, it's one thing to not have money. It's one thing to not be able to spend money. It's another thing to be total idiots in how you spend your money. The limited money you have, you waste. That's probably my biggest problem with the Pirates. The limited amount of money they have, they waste. And so, I can't help you if you don't understand why fans get frustrated with them. It makes no sense, but it's true. They just don't know how to get out of their own way ever. So we'll have to see how that develops and kind of sort of watch every single day to see who's playing first base. But again, understand, most of them are, never, ever going to play first base for the Pirates. They're just not. And the reason is because when Spencer Horwitz gets back, that's the position he was brought here to play. And I think that's the biggest thing with respect to the Pirates is that you better understand that it is going to be, I think at least, you better understand that it's going to be a long, long, long season if you don't figure something out at first base, number one. If you don't figure out something in right field that's better than Tommy Pham, if you don't figure out your catching situation and your shortstops, there's a lot of holes that needed to be filled. But first base was one that you kind of felt like, well, okay, I understand what they did here. They probably have filled it adequately. And now, well, no, they haven't. That's really, really the biggest problem I see. And that's what I would tell you, is so frustrating about the Pirates because it's every single year the same exact thing. Speaking of every single year the same exact thing, I watched last night Pitt play against SMU. They were dominated in that game. I don't know what to do or what to think about the future of Jeff Capel. But I'm watching a team that I think is sort of just kind of falling apart. Watching a program that's not taking steps forward. Watching a team that continues to lose games. Game after game after game after game. And I know SMU has a good overall record, but it's built on against a bunch of really bad teams. And the problem that Pitt has now is very simple. They're going to win their next 4 games because they're playing 4 bad teams. Okay? They're playing 4 of the worst teams in the ACC. Georgia Tech, Syracuse, Notre Dame, and Miami. Now, it's entirely possible that if they lose one of those games, they're completely out of it. There's no question about it. But winning those games, it's not going to help them get to where they need to get to. It just isn't. I mean, the reality is, you know what? You're not gaining any ground beating those bad teams. So the thing is now they're running out of opportunities. They absolutely have to win in Louisville next month. I think it's like the first week of March they play at Louisville. They got to win that game. And then they got to win a couple games in the ACC tournament to have a prayer. I just don't know that they have enough left. Absent of winning the entire ACC, I just don't know if they have enough left, to be honest, in order to make up the ground they need to make up to get back to the right side of the bubble. So if they don't make it, that's 6 out of 7 years he hasn't made the tournament. I just don't think that's going to be good enough. And so anyway, we'll talk more about the Pirates tomorrow. We'll bring you some more football stuff. We'll do a whole lot of other good stuff. Thank you, as always, for joining in, and hopefully you have a good Wednesday. Until tomorrow, enjoy the night. And, of course, stay out of trouble.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.